My friends, let's be honest, the first week of Ukraine's counteroffensive ended in a horrible military blunder. Put simply, elite armored units of the Ukrainian army got annihilated before even reaching the first Russian line of defense. Here's a quick summary.
Leave me alone!
And Forbes is coping so hard. Social media armchair generals are focused on the loss of one Leopard 2 MBT in Ukraine. 999! Not one, but 4 German-made Leopard 2s were recorded as destroyed or abandoned within 2 days. As a matter of fact, it's actually 7 Leopard 2s confirmed as destroyed or abandoned according to video evidence. Because after the first failed attempt, they went back.
Oh shit, here we go again.
And lost another 3 Finnish Leopard 2R mine-breaching vehicles. 3 out of the 6 Ukraine received. Sadly, this confirms this theory I told you many months ago in the following video. German tanks will once again burn on the steppes of Ukraine. And burned they did. And to add insult to injury, here you can see some Russian soldiers recording videos next to that Leopard 2A6 and the Bradleys from that tank graveyard. The problem is that this area they chose to attack is by far the most fortified on the entire Ukraine front. They will have to cross over pure flat terrain with barely any cover, and then try to push through 5 layers of entrenchments, anti-tank obstacles, minefields, you name it. Yet the Ukrainian command still launched the attack, with tightly packed armored columns just entering straight into minefields. And most importantly, without proper artillery support or air cover. And that's not all. During these 2 days, Ukraine also lost 17 Bradley infantry vehicles, model M2A2 ODS SA. 17 out of the 99 that this unit had. 6 more days of combat like this, and the brigade is gone, eliminated. And I guess the shoutouts to NATO trolls they painted on their Bradleys did not really bring them luck. And we remember a lot of the videos circulating online before the offensive with NATO vehicles simply ramming into Russian anti-tank obstacles. Well, turns out they all got destroyed kilometers before even reaching the anti-tank obstacles. And surprise, surprise, German newspaper Bild writes, Russians fight better than expected. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, just like with many other commentators, some of my Ukraine war videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. June 7th, D-1. On June 7th, Ukrainian soldiers were reassured by the powerful roars, thunderous rumbling and metallic clinking of their new German-made Leopard 2 tanks. With those, they would reach Crimea in no time. While the attack on the east side of the front was dwindling down, Ukrainian artillery started pounding in the sector of Orekhiv to soften Russian enemy positions for the impending assault. The armed forces of Ukraine also made heavy use of their famous HIMARS to inflict devastating pain deep into Russian rears by striking Russian command posts, ammunition depots and various logistical hubs, and artillery positions, like this Grad MR-less system that got hit. Meanwhile, the Russians had already packed their bags and were preparing to run. In reality, in the past few weeks, the Russians preemptively knocked out Ukraine's air defense capabilities. Here you can see Russian artillery destroying a unit of the British Stormer air defense system, followed by some footage of a burning Ukrainian mid-range Buk launcher. And in this video, a German TRML-4D radar station got destroyed by some Russian loitering ammunition, which would essentially render the Iris-T missile launchers blind. And this allowed the Russian aviation to roam freely in the air and to target any large concentration of Ukrainian troops even before the offensive. Meanwhile, the Russians also rained Lancet kamikaze drones on Ukrainian artillery positions, like this unlucky M777 howitzers and its 2 crew, horrible. Or like this other M777 that was detected while at its most vulnerable while it was on the move, and then subsequently taken out. Without even taking into account all these self-propelled howitzers that were taken out. Now, despite the lack of air cover and diminishing artillery support, this is when the 65th and 47th Mechanized Brigades regrouped their forces in Mala Tokmashka for Ukraine's much anticipated Kontrnastup. The plan was most likely the following: launch a diversion attack on Lobkove. Then instead of launching a frontal attack against the heavily fortified town of Robotine, the plan was to exit Mala Tokmashka, bypass the high ground from the east, break through the first line of defense in order to encircle and flank the Russian defenders in Robotine, from where the second wave could carry on the battle towards Tokmak. Well, that was according to the computer simulations they did before the attack. The tragedy of this entire story that nobody talks about is that the 47th Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine was the flagship of the counteroffensive, as it's one of Ukraine's most elite military formations. For 6 months, they underwent intensive combat training in various locations throughout Europe, specifically for this counteroffensive. The Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine's high command picked the 47th to be filled out primarily with green soldiers, trained first in Britain, primarily by Commonwealth nation instructors. Blank canvas, only with NATO painting. Meanwhile, the Washington Post wrote, the brand new 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade was preparing for the next phase of the war from a classroom at a NATO base in Germany. That's because the 47th was outfitted with 99 M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. That's why the crews of these vehicles have been training at a US base in Germany in the town of Grafenwöhr. So you got it by now, this is essentially a NATO-trained brigade. And because of that, it also possesses the greatest amount of NATO weaponry than any other Ukrainian brigade. For example, almost all its riflemen carry the American M16A4 rifle and M203 40mm underbarrel grenade launchers, rather than the AK-47 style rifles that most Ukrainian troops carry. The leadership of the 47th Brigade was also especially young, and this was done on purpose. They did not want any commander that went through Soviet-era military training. First, there is Shalamaha, who is 25. Here you can see 28-year-old Alexander Sak as a brigade commander. And lastly, the headmaster sergeant, Instagram-famous 29-year-old Valery Marcos. Despite their age, all three of them have years of combat experience under their belt. The idea was to mold the 47th Brigade into Western military tactics. Ukrainian newspaper ZNUA said, they're trained in offensive maneuvers, as well as combined warfare, which involves the joint work of various types of weapons and units to achieve maximum effect. And on top of all this, they replaced the old M55S Soviet-era tanks that the brigade originally had, with dozens of Leopard 2s from other units to create a real armored fist. Yet how come that on June 8th and on the 9th, this elite brigade would get hammered hard? Perhaps the Kyiv Post foreshadowed this as they wrote, trained by Commonwealth nation instructors and, as the offensive kicks off, probably lacking combat experience. Put simply, and I brought it up many times, Ukraine doesn't have enough engineering vehicles for all their axis of attack. Or perhaps demining the path they wanted to use took much longer than expected. So many armored columns ended up static in open ground for long periods of time. Like this one you can see, composed of 12 tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, all in a very compact formation. The Ukrainian armored column had not even reached the advanced outpost of the Russian line of defense that enemy howitzers started singing and unleashed a heavy artillery barrage on the Ukrainian columns. This is where the Russians swarmed the attacking force with their new Lancet 3 anti-armor drones. Here you can see how FPV drones of the 42nd Motor Rifle Division crashed into 3 very precious German Leopard 2 A4 tanks in the Orechiv sector. The goal was not necessarily to destroy them, but to damage them, to slow them down, and let helicopters or artillery finish them off. The same drone swarms hit a first T-72 M1 tank, and then a second one, which forced one of the crews to abandon their tank behind. Possibly a lot of these tanks were brought to the rear for repair, so we don't actually know how many losses the Ukrainians suffered during this offensive. These drone attacks were coupled with Russian drones guiding artillery strikes with extreme precision, and we can assess this by the small amount of random shell craters covering the entire battlefield. In the end, in this video, you can see a column of 8 Ukrainian vehicles. Suddenly, 3 artillery shells fall just meters away from them within only 2 seconds. With this incoming artillery barrage, with shells falling closer and closer to their position, the crews could either stay in position and wait for the inevitable, or try to get some cover, divert from the path where they could risk hitting a mine. This is when we got the first ever Leopard 2A4 destroyed by the Russians, which seems to have already been damaged by an FPV or a mine, and then eliminated by some direct artillery strike. The Wall Street Journal interviewed a Ukrainian soldier that took part in the battle, and he said, as soon as the regiment crossed a road outside of the town of Malatokmak, the Russians began to pummel them with Grad rockets. The fields were mined. Russian helicopters and jet fighters buzzed overhead. Meanwhile, another Ukraine column was pushing forward, composed of the new M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, closely following the path of a BMR-2 mine-clearing vehicle at the front. This is when they approached these outposts, the set of Russian entrenchments kilometers ahead of the main line of defense. These positions were not meant to be defended at all costs, as they were probably manned by Kornet anti-tank squads or artillery observers, because it seems the BMR-2 mine-clearing vehicle got hit by an ambushed ATGM crew hidden in the tree line. At the same time, we have footage evidence that this Ukrainian column has been ambushed by some Ka-52 alligators. In this helicopter footage, we can see an advancing column. The silhouette of the vehicles remind the one of the M2 Bradley. And here we can see a first pile of destroyed vehicles, reminiscent of the pictures we saw from the tank graveyard. If we assume the Ka-52 fired a Vichar-1 anti-tank guided missile that took 25 seconds to reach the target, we can estimate that the helicopter fired from 8 kilometers away. Horrible, that helicopter was literally waiting for this armored column like an alligator would wait for his prey. As you can imagine, immediately after, chaos erupted. Here you can see a pretty unique first-person view of the battle. This Bradley is clearly firing at the tree line, thinking there are enemy troops in the sector. Doing so, he almost friendly fired on this other Bradley that was retreating. So that would confirm the theory that the Bradleys did in fact face Russian man-portable Kornets. A couple seconds later, that Bradley gets a huge load on his face from the explosion coming from the bottom, which points towards an anti-tank mine. As you can see on these images, at this point the goal was to rescue the riflemen that were inside the vehicles that got hit. We can see some red smoke screen. About 7 riflemen jumped on top of the Bradley, meaning this one was already full of troops, either from another squad that was rescued or with its original passengers. However, notice the absence of the Leopard 2 in this frame. That means that the Leopard 2A6 actually intervened later in the firefight. Perhaps they feared the intervention of some camouflaged Russian T-90Ms. Here's another perspective of this rescue mission. We can see huge smoke screens and the infantrymen firing sporadically towards the tree line with the rifles and machine guns. In the end, we got this footage of this tank graveyard that went viral on social media. You can see 1 Leopard 2A6 destroyed or abandoned, 4 M2 Bradley IFVs destroyed one after the other, and 1 mine-clearing BMR-2. It's hard to say precisely what happened. All we know is that they entered a well-prepared fire bag, an ambush. The broken tracks of the Bradleys could definitely be the result of artillery strikes, as we can see by the scattered artillery shell craters. However, I can't see any craters right next to the vehicles that got hit. Perhaps this is the work of anti-tank mines, just like with the other Bradley we saw earlier, or perhaps a deadly combination of anti-tank mines, artillery strikes, man-portable Kornets, and Ka-52 helicopters. And this was not even the end of the story, since they were followed by a second wave, most likely to continue the assault and to storm these Russian outposts. They bypassed the graveyard and most likely got hit by a combination of artillery and anti-tank weapons, which added another 5 M2 Bradleys to the cemetery. On top of that, the same day, Ukraine also lost another Leopard 2, a T-64BV, another M2A2 Bradley, which has also probably been the victim of a Ka-52 alligator. Might as well just continue the list. There's also a French VAB, and a YPR 675, and various trucks. The elite 47th Mechanized Brigade got smashed even before reaching the enemy outposts. In response to this disaster, Headmaster Sergeant Valeri Marcus posted this video saying, "Shut up, just shut up, so you don't have to apologize later," which in Ukrainian can be translated as,
"We fucked up."
The big lesson is that the Ukrainians tried to open passages across minefields using mine rollers. But what's shocking to me is that we already know that this doesn't work when the Russians effed up their attack using the same exact tactics in Vuhledar. This could also indicate the absence of trained sappers who could conduct anti-mine reconnaissance at night and open large and wide corridors for armored vehicles using elongated charges, for example. June 9th, D+1. The next day, the Ukrainians launched a renewed attack, most likely with the 47th Mechanized Brigade. This time, instead of moving east, they attacked directly towards the village of Robotine, with an attack of roughly 30 Ukrainian armored vehicles. One unit attempted to rush the village at full speed with 10 vehicles. Here you can see the aftermath by yourself. 11 recorded losses. But that's not even the worst part. We can see 3 destroyed Leopard 2R heavy mine breaching vehicles. And the worst is that Ukraine only got 6 units of those. 50% losses in a day! Then, knowing the magnitude of the F-up, they sent a German Bergenpanzer recovery vehicle to at least be able to retrieve those tanks, but that one also got hit. Meanwhile, in the back, we can see 2 destroyed or abandoned Leopard 2A6 and 2 additional Bradleys. Once again, one of the main culprits of the defeat of the Leopard 2A6 is the Lancet. In this footage, you can see a direct impact of a kamikaze drone on one of the tank's weak points, which ended up disabling it. And the tragedy of it all is that the Ukrainians understood that having only 1 demining vehicle per axis of attack will for sure create massive traffic jams. So this time, they positioned 4 of them side by side in order to demine a large corridor. Yes, 4, because you have these 3 Leopard 2s and this Max Pro also with mine-sweeping equipment that got destroyed. In the end, it was reported that the Ukrainians got somewhat close to the town of Robotine, but that any gains they made were repulsed during the Russian counterattack. Meanwhile, to hinder Russian logistics and to improve their chances during their second attack they will launch, Ukrainians used their Mars 2 MRLS to create remote minefields along the roads Russian supply trucks use. From what I read, it's like an artillery shell that drops 5 mines at a time, falling at a distance of 10 meters from each other. And it's very possible that this Russian ammo convoy got hit going over such a remote minefield. And here you can see a Russian soldier firing at one of these DM-1399 mines to clear the road. After these 2 very bloody days of combat, by June 10th, the Ukrainian command slowed down the offensive. They had to lick their wounds and they essentially changed tactics. Instead of large armored formations, this time groups of infantrymen would be sent forward in order to storm these stubborn outposts once and for all. However, this doesn't change the fact that they will have to face the combined effect of minefields and Russian artillery. Like this Ukrainian squad that got hit from incoming shells while trying to take refuge in some entrenchments they had recently captured. At the moment, only 1/3 of Ukraine's offensive brigades have been engaged in battle. While the Ukrainian General Staff is rethinking their assault on Melitopol with the 2/3 of the brigades they have left, this is when they renewed the attack on the Velika Novosilka salient. But that will be for next video. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The link is in the description below.